There we go. That's a little better. All right. Back to Wednesdays. Let's get these Koan cards going here a little bit. Haven't really played with these for a little bit. Last live was 2 weeks ago. We had a satsang on Saturday, and that turned out to be pretty fantastic. So I will be here to answer any questions if anyone has any. I know people will tend to pop in a little later as we go. We'll start off with a card to... Whoa, that was interesting. Focus is weird. There we go. Where am I? A lot of the way we play in self-inquiry is location-oriented. There seems to be an effort of the mind that's casting or projecting outwardly. It has this essence of effort that's casting over the pond, so to speak, or resting in this pond of experience. And the way the mind tends to function is to cast out to future events, to distant locations, to past events, these kinds of things. And so the inquiry of where am I can actually be really powerful because it essentially brings attention really close to home. And that's where we want to be in the midst of this as we explore. And this is actually a perpetual type of experience, a regular form of engagement. So where am I? And sit with that for a second. Where am I now? It's almost an invitation to invite us directly into the senses. Where am I now? Where am I now? We have to feel that. We have to really be in the midst of what's being visually seen and what's being heard. The mind might attempt to create location. It might make an imaginary map even, but we can only get into that question authentically and honestly if we are in the senses right here. Can you feel where you are? Can you feel location? Can you feel ends of location? Does there seem to be a boundary with location? Is there a place I am and a place I am not? And that's an interesting piece there too, because you cannot know where you are not. Even in your direct experience now, let's just look into the visual field for a second. And if you're looking around a space, maybe you're in a room now, wherever it may be, and the eyes are giving us this sense of depth sometimes, this sense of distance. But even with that, if you rest in the senses, you will start to see where attention is meeting attention. You will feel where attention meets attention. You've probably heard this particular pointing. It's a good one, though, because it starts to bring it into a more personalized experience of what do the eyes feel with sight? What does texture feel like? And it might not be felt in the eyes themselves. It might be felt in the body, but what is texture like? Can you feel that vibrational frequency of texture and color and shape? It's really palpable, the sensation of attention meeting attention. And then see if you can find maybe a line between what's being seen and what's being felt. Can you decipher a very clear line? Is there an obvious separation there? These are kind of sub-inquiries built into where am I? And it starts to get a little bit more palpable from there. We start to get into something like a experience of a body, experience of a container. Is there a container? Are we contained? can you verify that what seems to be experienced contained within the body, can you verify that that's happening there only, or is it seemingly just here? Maybe not in or out, but here. Aren't you everything that's being experienced now? In this direct experience, aren't you all sound? Aren't you what's being seen? Oh yeah, check out the shirt. Send memes. Aren't you what's being felt? Aren't you all of this experience? Are you not attention itself? Say hello to, let's say hi to Jennifer and to Sarah. Nice to see you, Sarah. Is that a birthday cake? That's beautiful. Does anybody have any questions? It's been a while since I've gotten some questions in the chat. Jump in the chat, ask some questions, get a Koan card. It's okay, whatever direction this seems to go, by the way. Even if it takes more of a talk tone instead of a satsang oriented tone, that's still okay. We will be perpetually improv oriented, spontaneous in the engagement. Why not? See what happens. There were some really good questions asked in satsang this weekend. That's a good one. So Jennifer has a deck. Awesome. And her card was what never changes. That's a pointing to impermanence. If we were to simplify the human experience a lot, we would basically end up with this sense of something that wants to remain permanent in a universe that is constantly changing, something that wants to have a sense of permanence in that. That's essentially all the identity is some sort of conclusive endpoint of experience in that which never seems to stop changing. What never changes at all. And we can have those really temporal experiences of that which doesn't change. You know, maybe you have granite countertops and it seems like they're, you know, always granite. But if we actually sit with it and we're close to the experience, there's these tiny minutia experiences of change with everything, even the things that seem to be absolutely solid and perpetual. Sit with that one for a second. What never changes? Sometimes that will create another casting out over the pond, so to speak. But see if you can bring it close. What never changes right here? What is not changing at all here? Isn't this changing now? Are the sounds in the timbre of the voice that you're hearing, is that absolutely predictable? Or is it somehow changing, somehow a flowing experience? If we look at things in a general sense, which is kind of how the mind functions, once we start to remove ourselves from the intricacies of experience, we start to generalize experience. And by generalizing experience, and we see this in a myriad of ways, by the way, by generalizing experience, it does seem like there might be a sense of permanence, but we're missing out on the intricacies of our experience. This happens in the emotional center of the body as well. When we have a sadness, that's a generalized assumptive experience. And so when we dive into that and we start to experience the intricacies of the sensation, it becomes rather clear that this cannot be generalized. It's too dynamic for generalization. That seems to apply literally everywhere. Queen is here. Nice to see you. What never changes? You might have a sense of your day-to-day life as being something consistent and never changing. But in the actual experience of your day-to-day life, there must be change. There must be impermanence. That's the piece. Do you see it? There cannot be permanence in that. Another pointing to kind of clarify here is, if we step into the willingness to be surprised, fascinated by our lives, by our experience, a lot will begin to come to the surface. It's in the willingness to be fascinated. Because even if you do the same thing day in and day out, even if it was something as menial as a factory type of job, and it's just like this repetitious behavior, there's something in it that is also transformative and changing and moving. And this is how immersed the encouragement is, to be so immersed in life itself that you see it can never actually be generalized in any way. That's it. That's all. And I know that even then the mind might say, well, that's still boring, or that, of course, it's always changing in that way. But I want, and what it's looking for is something conclusive again, a generalized sense of conclusion. It feels safe for us, but doesn't make it safe at all. I mean, probably everyone here in the midst of this live can see how safety can become the bars on the prison cell itself. The idea of safety and comfort. These things are actually a clamoring to disconnect and disassociate from the absolute vibrancy of life. It's really vivid today. It ebbs and flows on its own, but it's very visual today. Like a lot of motion. So the encouragement is just as a play, just as an experiment. Dig into your existence all the time, just all the way in. Let the senses be the guide. Obviously, the pointings are going to be somewhat consistent, just because this interface that we can talk about, there's a sensation thought interface. It's not really actually happening, but that's the impression that we have, that these thoughts and these sensations, there's a connection. These experiences and sadness and frustration and anxiety, all these things seem to be connected. That is primarily how contextual thought is working. It's still generalizing the experience. But if you are absolutely immersed in it, it starts to take a tone that can be nothing more or less than fascination. It also, for some reason, in the midst of that fascination, starts to take a tone of something pleasurable. It feels nice. It feels authentic. It feels real. From there, the unfolding begins to happen, like that infinite dahlia, the flower that's blooming out of itself with all those petals and blooming right back into itself. It's kind of beautiful. There's a poetry to this. And yeah, we're probably anthropomorphizing that to some degree. But and a reminder, just like this weekend at Satsang, this is a human path. This is a human experience. We must become all the way human in order to discover that we are more than just human, it seems. So let's see. Sandra's here. Francisca. Next, she says, what is intimacy? I hear that a word a lot, but maybe have a different meaning. Do my best not to create hard definitions with things, but in the midst of play, like if we're creating a framework just to kind of play and see, it can be useful to create definitions. But this is not This is only true in the moment, let's just say, if we create a definition. Intimacy is the experience of that which is close, visceral, vivid, and alive. That's intimacy. Intimacy has a tone of being open. Intimacy has a tone of being connected. Intimacy has a tone of being present. And really, we could just put it this way: our most intimate experience as a human being is what we feel in this area of the body. It seems to be primarily what is intimate is being absolutely engaged with what we are feeling in the emotional center of the body. And it can show up obviously in relationship. Intimacy is a mutual opening, a mutual connection there. But more than that, it's a willingness for openness. It's a willingness to step away from the mechanisms of protection. Intimacy is our truest nature. We are intimate. Intimacy is innocent. It's not protected. Intimacy is not conclusive. It doesn't have a sense of solidity or certainty to it. Intimacy is curious. It's very much about authenticity. The feeling of intuition, it's always a feeling. Intuition itself might reach the thought level and be able to be translated, but intuition itself is a feeling. That's intimate. The ability to freely express without restriction, that is intimate. The ability to engage our sexuality completely without any restriction, without any guidelines, without any repression, that's intimate. Our ability to allow ourselves to be infinitely creative without judgment and without any sort of restriction there too is intimate. Our ability to step into curiosity and fascination is intimate. Our ability to challenge these mechanisms of the mind and of conditioning is intimate, that courage. And ultimately, it's a form of selfless giving. Intimacy is a willingness to be metaphorically, absolutely naked in any given instant with any given person in any given circumstance. It's just being completely, fully engaged with ourselves, so to speak, this experience that seems to arise in a unique, relative way. That's intimacy. I know that didn't make it really clear in terms of a very simple definition, but intimacy seems to encapsulate all of our most human experiences. And what I mean by most human is the ones that aren't based on protection and survival, the ones that are just fundamentally, spontaneously, unpredictably arising. So that's a really good question, though, by the way, because oftentimes intimacy is used in relationship. And of course, relationships can be intimate. It's closeness to experience. It's experiencing directly. It's expressing in the midst of that experience. It's interesting how expression isn't a secondary experience at all. It's actually arising now. It's that sound and that sigh we make when we lay down after a long day. That's intimate. Just that, oh. But right now you can experience intimacy. In fact, right now you are. There's no way around that. Yet you can bring perceptive attention to it, and you will start to see that you can never be away from intimacy. We can perceptively move away, and that seems to be the crux of all suffering. But this is intimate. No filter, no adjustment, no modification, no manipulation, no change. Just everything as it is intimate. When people have glimpses or they have that strong Kensho experience initially, it can only be described as intimacy. Just a vividness of presence, a nowness, a thisness. That's intimacy. That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, though. And yes, good morning from, I don't even know how to say that, but I love it. It's Aotearoa. Aotearoa. Man, I love that. That's New Zealander though, right? Thank you for joining us. So glad you're here, actually. You have such great questions in the chats and also in the comments of the video. So thank you for that. Jennifer, thanks for attending while you could. Nice to see you here. All right. Well, next to that right there, I'll just keep using your handle name. Is a great question. Here's a Koan card. Let's see if I can get this to focus. Is there ever a time where you don't feel? Is there ever a time where you do not feel? Some of you might be noticing the mind attempting, like you can probably feel the essence of effort right there, like a bubbling up of energy that wants to be kind of contained and densified. And it is going to attempt to find an answer. That's one of the benefits of inquiry, by the way, is to start to see the mechanism of the mind that must always have an answer. And it really will put some work and energy into that. And it can feel quite a bit like effort, or you might even need a sense of resistance in that. Keep in mind that with these questions, there is no need for a conclusive answer. It's just supposed to spark or catalyze some sort of curiosity, some sort of engagement. Is there ever a time where you don't feel? Doesn't need to be a yes or a no. Even if you do come to a conclusive answer, don't hinge experience on these answers. The essence of engagement is not to objectify it, this noun of life. Life is an ongoingness. It's really just to be engaged. So, in other words, we're essentially asking these questions newly every time, all the time, perpetually. And eventually these verbal questions begin to crumble and collapse. And then we are essentially stepping into something that's closer to the energetics of curiosity, the energetics of fascination. It's like a question mark energy. That's it. That's what engagement looks like. Let it show you instead of you being certain before entering. We don't need an insurance policy to live. We don't need to know something before experiencing it. It actually doesn't even work that way. That's how preferences tend to function. Oh, I'm a chocolate guy. I don't really like vanilla. You know that before the experience, and you're basing that on what's called past experience, but do you actually know that for certain now? So the question mark gets us to engage directly. When somebody presents chocolate or vanilla ice cream, we go, why not both? Let me just see right now. Let me see now. And from there, if there's a leaning toward one or the other, that's more attuned to maybe an instinct or intuition than a preference, but it's still worth exploring nonetheless. We definitely do have natural emotions that seem to be entirely out of our control, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's a preference there. You might find that motion changes on its own, so you don't need to hold it into place. The identity likes to use that as a reference point so it knows who it is or what it is. It's not necessary. We're perpetually in a state of transformation. The labels seem to come so automatically, bird chirping, children playing, etc. Yeah, that's okay. If the labels are coming on their own in such a way, let them. But we don't have to hinge experience. Notice the label and then go back to what it's like to be immersed in the experience. So you're listening. Thought says bird chirping. That's fine. Let the thought assist. It's just assisting. Doesn't matter. We don't hinge bird chirping. We go right back into the quality of sound, the experience of sound, the feeling of sound, the texture of sound. Keep bringing attention into the visceral aspects instead of settling on a bird chirping and then pulling away. If you pay a lot of attention, you'll notice that once the mind comes in and creates a label or a sense of solidity to something, there also comes a secondary piece of pulling away from the experience. Okay, I already know. Now I'm away from it. Instead, you stay persistent in your engagement. That's all. So let the labels come. Children playing. Cool. What's that? Now it's the sound. Now it's the sound again. Even if the mind is being persistent, now it's the sound. 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 And yes, I'm giving a verbal quality to that, but I'm just giving you the sense of how persistent experience truly is and intention truly is. Be with the visceral nature of the experience. And every time a thought comes up, push back right into the sound. And then a thought comes up, right back into the sound. Now you're not fighting the thought. You're noticing and moving back. Noticing and moving back. And that can feel like an oscillation. That oscillation is crucial here, though. Don't worry about the oscillation. Because as we begin to vibrate in such a way and move from what seems to be one place to another place, it starts to shake itself apart, and we realize there is no dual experience happening here. We are both sound and thought and sound and thought. But now we're not fixated on thought. We aren't identified with thought. And pay attention also how persistent the thoughts want to multiply, how it wants us to add a thought to the thought, how it wants us to analyze the thought with a thought, those kinds of things. Let the labels come automatically. It's not a problem. It's the relationship. I'm really doing my best to make this clear. It's hard to quite encapsulate into words, but maybe somebody right now is starting to gather this in a felt way. It is not about the object of the experience. It is about the relationship, that sense of attention with it. If it feels sticky, there's a sense of resistance or avoidance happening there. That doesn't even mean that there's a problem in that. It's just notice that. Keep noticing, move, notice, move. Now there's only sound. Now there's only sound. Physical pain during this is very challenging. Physical pain can definitely be very challenging because there's an automatic interpretation with pain, with the physical nature. Oftentimes, physical pain, depending on relationship with the pain, can be an indication of getting closer, allowing ourselves to be absolutely sensitized, because that's essentially what we're doing is we're moving back into reassociating with our experiences instead of depending on a sense of disassociation. If it has a history of physical pain, then you'll probably start uncovering beliefs. You might even discover some sort of existential kink in that. And what that looks like is a dependence on pain as a form of orientation. It is definitely challenging for sure. And I usually recommend that people continue taking this path in this existential way, this existential experience of pain. Stay focused on that, and then it starts to transcend itself in that physical way too. It's really interesting, but the explorations in physical pain for me here have been somewhat extreme. I'm not even going to get into details, but there have been some extreme experiments just to see what pain was really about, and it is not what we think it is, that's for sure. So I have plenty of empathy around your experience in pain. And for now, continue on the path of exploring this existential pain primarily, because they are ultimately the same thing, but they seem to have kind of a different flavor initially. And if physical pain has a sense of perpetual nature to it, it can also make it really challenging. And the best pointing I can give without pushing too hard is become the experience, whatever it may be. Become the pain, become the sensation, become the sound, become what's seen, become what's here. Closer, closer, more, deeper, deeper. And see, Josh, I started dating a girl recently. It's been a year since dating, and I recognize old thought patterns coming back more than expected. There's a lot of emotion. It's actually really good. Okay, so this is a common experience, just so you know. A lot of people, when they're single, will have a very vivid awakening. Maybe even some deeper stage things start to arise. And then we get into a relationship and we find other things starting to come back up. It's a good sign, actually. Just stay vigilant. That's all. Because anything that was laying dormant that wasn't being accessed for whatever reason, doesn't matter, while you were single is now starting to come to the surface in the midst of this potential relationship. And it's just more integration occurring. Let the emotions come. Allow yourself to become extremely vulnerable in this relationship, extremely honest, regardless of potential outcome or consequences. Be so honest and raw about what you're feeling, about what you're going through. And it will basically determine if the other person is even ready to engage in such a way. Do not make any sacrifices. Oftentimes when we open up in such a way, the person we're engaging with begins to do so also. It's like its own form of leadership. So I know it probably feels a little scary. Relationships can have that tone. They are very good at bringing up some very early, we could just say, childhood trauma. And I know that there is no time and there is no past, but whatever these narratives are, they still seem to be here. And so that's what it's doing, is it's spiking a narrative. It's spiking a subconscious mechanism of protection. It is essentially bringing shadow to the surface. So you must engage with it as is best you can. It's a good thing. I know it probably doesn't feel comfortable, and I know those thoughts probably go crazy, and they probably want you to modify certain behaviors and certain things of what feels natural. Don't fall for it. Stay vigilant. It feels more relevant to be in thought now that it's also about another person rather than dealing with thoughts about myself, but also, well, of course, there are. Yeah, nothing wrong with thoughts. Nothing wrong with thoughts. We just don't fixate. Thoughts arise on their own. There's no controlling that. There's no goal around thoughts. That's a misconception. I think it's probably perpetuated to some degree by certain pointers, but thoughts, there's nothing there. There's no substance. And so if you know that you're in thought more often, it's not a problem, but just continuously remind yourself that your highest intelligence is what's felt. There will be an intuition in that. There's an intimacy in that. Relationships, in this way, especially dating, it is about intimacy after all. No insurance policy. All the way. Full engagement. Now, I'm not telling you to do anything in particular here. I'm not saying to take unnecessary risks with your livelihood or things in that regard. What I am telling you to do, though, is get as intimate as you possibly can in the sharing, in the communication, in the engagement, and continue. Just continue. And it's not a test, but you will see if somebody is ready to engage with that. And if they're not, then they probably won't be suitable to continue. Do not make concessions. That's important. And I'm not saying to be selfish either. What I am saying is notice where sacrifices want to be made, because this is what tends to happen in relationships. People, especially new ones, people want to start entering into a self-sacrificial behavior because there's a pattern to that. If I enter into a self-sacrificial behavior, I'll be able to show this person my value. And if they see enough value, they'll stay with me and I won't be alone. There's a lot of subtext rolled up into that. So the recommendation is just stay the path, really engage with what's being felt and engage in intimacy and start revealing that shadow. If it's coming up, reveal it to that person as honestly as you possibly can. I think you actually will be surprised. Most human beings are actually very receptive to that. And there's something in that breaks that pattern itself. But it's not about the outcome. It's not about how they take it. It's just about the way you are willing to engage in an honest, raw, open, intimate way. Funny, not funny that I felt alien from childhood and tried to conform and then undoing all that and back to alien again. Yeah. The Bible has the Tower of Babel story, and that's kind of about being alien in a way. We're all speaking a different language. It can feel that way. We all speak a different head language, that's for sure. That's what makes experience seemingly relative or unique, is the way that thoughts seem to show up and arise, and all those weird little permutations and combinations of thoughts. That's our own unique language. But at our core, as you begin to continue engaging with intimacy, especially since you asked that question about intimacy, as you continue to engage with that, you find we are exactly the same, that there is no one else. We are experiencing the same thing. We are the same intuition. We are the same curiosity. We are the same courage. This hybrid experience of being a human being is quite a paradox. There is no being, nothing, no one, empty. There's no non-being, there's still a nose. We must experience both as fully as it's being presented. That's it. It is what it is. So, yes, of course, there's an element of being an alien. And yes, of course, we are all exactly the same. And in the midst of that, there's these weird compensations of conformity and societal pressures and conditioning along the way. And basically what we're doing is we're undoing that duality by experiencing it in its most honest, authentic form, direct experience itself. Know yourself to forget yourself. It's so funny. That pointing had been going on for a long time until somebody had sent me that quote from Dogen. I mean, it's a simplified version of his quote. One must know themselves in order to forget themselves. Of course, wisdom is like this. We all have it. These intuitive pieces of wisdom will just come up at random. Nobody can own it. Nobody holds it. We are just simply instruments being played. And I'm telling you so intimately right now, there is no better experience than just being played. There's no more freedom than just being played. Free will is a trap. The idea of free will imparts so much responsibility and management that we don't see that it is actually what is imprisoning us. But to be absolutely embedded in with everything as it is, that's freedom. It's very interesting. I'm trying to be authentic with her. She's extremely supportive and accepting, but it can be difficult for sure. Feels like I can't express every thought, like I'm already afraid of losing you. Why don't you say that? Just the expression of I'm afraid of losing you already is going to get you in contact with some shadow. Can I lose you? Can you be gone? Can we be apart? What could be lost? What can be gained? It's just, just what love is like. It's the feeling of such intense intimacy of connection. It's okay. No judgment. Just say it. I'm already afraid of losing you. I miss you already. I love you and I barely know you. Dig in. It's worth it. If somebody gets scared, it has nothing to do with you. It feels very much like falling in love all the time. The connections in this experience. And then sometimes that connection is just really clear. It's really profound. Doesn't mean there's a favorite. It's just sometimes that's just how it arises. Embrace that too. We don't need exclusive relationships in the way that we always think, but it sometimes arises like that. So what? Embrace that too. Explore it all as thoroughly and as engaged as possible, for sure. Patty says, no words for finding you here this morning, such love and openness. Yeah, of course. And thank you for being here. Sandra says, I also started dating. Thanks for the question. Yeah. Fall is such a good season for love. Why not? Dig all the way in. Get as honest as you possibly can. Get as naked as you possibly can, metaphorically. Well, also physically. Get as naked and open and honest, as raw as you possibly can allow, and you will start to see where the shadow is. You will start to see where things are hiding. And We're not using someone else for our own benefit. We're just getting as real as possible, which is actually that's intimacy. That's real. But the benefit is it's not for anyone, to anyone, not really. It just is. Get innocent in your love. Get as innocent in your love as you possibly can. You'll start to see where you play games. You'll start to see where past relationships are beginning to affect current behavior in thought. It's okay that these thoughts are arising, but just here's your reminder. It's a felt experience. That's all it ever is. The thoughts are doing their best to scramble, to manage, to protect. You do not need to be protected in love. You do not need to be protected in connection. You do not need to be protected in intimacy. So the more intimate you are, the more you will find there is nothing to protect. Even if someone gets mean, if they reject, still nothing to protect. Everything works itself out. Get real. Get honest. Even if it's petty, get honest. Get honest about everything. Get honest about your appearance. And if you're feeling insecure about how you look, get honest about your body, the way you feel. Get honest about your behavior. Get honest about how you don't want to show certain things. Get honest, get honest, get honest. You will thank yourself for that. It's worth it. Take risks. Take a lot of risks. And what I mean by risks is personal risks. I'm not asking you to base jump. But if that's your thing, I don't also don't reject it. It seems like no matter what our chronological age, the pointers are valid. Of course, it's the same. I mean, even in the midst of a marriage, do you actually have an ongoing relationship, or is that relationship right now? There's a lot there too. A lot of intimacy to be explored. Do I know anything about this person? Could I possibly resent this experience here? Or is that just a story? Am I just depending on a narrative? Those things too. Queen says, can you talk about disgust or dramatic thoughts? I've been a lot of that viscerally, burping, like wanting to throw up thoughts. I want to die. I want to kill me. I want to die. But of course I don't. Yes. Okay. So disgust is a really interesting aspect of this. In fact, it's one of those human emotions, human experiences that we don't often get into a lot because we tend to generalize so much that it turns into something like frustration, anger, or whatever. But disgust is actually really palpable, its own thing. In fact, disgust has something to do with wanting to be away from something with a very strong sense of judgment. There's a prejudgment in disgust. The dramatic thoughts, by the way, I'll get into that real quick too. And even if it's something's coming up physically, it is usually a very strong indication that we're getting close to something. The weirdest thing about this protection mechanism of identity and mind is it initially wants to protect the biological system, the body. To put it in a framework, as children, that's when it starts coming online and it gets pretty strong. Me, mine, all these things. And then it eventually starts kind of perverting itself into wanting to protect only itself. And that's where thoughts of suicide arise. Here's what I will say. If there is one person here that said they never had thoughts of suicide, then I would be very surprised and maybe even suspicious, even though I would never want to reject your experience. The mind eventually wants to protect itself, and its go-to eventually turns into, I just want to die. I just want to kill myself. I want to check the fuck out of this. So it's a good sign that you're getting close to something. Those dramatic thoughts are attempting to distract you. They're attempting to keep you busy. You must be getting close to some very fundamental wounding, some first wounding, some initial shadow there. In terms of the disgust, that's also used in the same way. But it's using a sense of judgment. It might have a sense of inward judgment. Most, of course, all disgust is an inward experience, but sometimes it projects itself outward. It's really just a very strong sense of judgment that tends to kind of capitalize on a feeling of nausea or, burping, these kinds of things. So when that comes up, drive attention directly into the center of the nausea, if there's nausea. Drive attention right into the center of the physical feeling in the body and become that. Sit with it And it's probably going to be intense. If it is, test your threshold. Do not push too hard. But if you can find where your 100% of what you can handle is, see if you can move just a little bit beyond that and then go ahead and take a break. The reason I'm encouraging you not to push too hard is those who do consistently can have some adverse reactions. But push to your threshold and a little beyond every time. Just kind of constantly playing with that. Hokey pokey it. Move your hand through the threshold. Pull it out. Move your hand in. Pull it out. That kind of thing. And it will begin to blur those lines naturally on its own. Is intimacy the transmission? Like there's some sort of connection that happens in that unexplainable way? Well, definitely. I mean, intimacy it's a felt experience. It does have a mysterious nature. It also has an uncontrollable aspect to it. I mean, really, the feeling of humiliation and the feeling of vulnerability are the same experience, but one has a significant amount of judgment. The other is much more open than that. It doesn't have that pairing of thought, or we aren't giving attention to that pairing in thought, that interface between thought sensation. So intimacy is definitely transmitted. It is ubiquitous. Intimacy is what the water is to the fish. It is empty. It is emptiness. It is love. It is compassion. It kind of incorporates all of it. But I think it's also okay for you to have your own experience of what intimacy is, because you actually already know the answer to these questions. You know intimacy because you experience it. And maybe it can't be put into words and translated in that way, but there's like a feeling there. And that's what these sessions tend to be. Somebody will explain something and maybe have a hard time putting it in words. And I'll just be like, no, stop. That's it. I can feel it. I feel it. That's it. That's exactly it. That's intimacy too. Yeah. It's transmission in that way for sure. So much compassion feels like too much. Yeah, that's another one, Sarah, for you in particular in this exploration and the things that are beginning to break open for you. This is so perfect, because if there feels like there's an experience of too much compassion, test that threshold too. What would it be like to experience compassion that goes too far? And I'm not talking about inaction. I'm talking about an experience. You will feel it. Does it feel like you're going to explode? Then explode. Does it feel like it's going to dissolve you? Let it dissolve you. At the most extremes in this, we start to discover that there's no felt experience that can harm us. There's no credible threat in what we feel. And so continue to test that threshold, continue to engage as thoroughly as possible with whatever that may be. If it's fear, move into the fear. Do you even know what fear is? If you say yes, here's your challenge. You can't know what fear is. Do you know what sadness is? If you say yes, here's your challenge. Can't be known. They don't exist. Have you ever grabbed a piece of fear? Did you ever leave a piece of fear in your pocket while you did the laundry? Did you lose a piece of fear when you put your socks in the dryer? There's nothing there. It's just an assumption. Get into the visceral, intimate experience directly, closely. Definitely had those suicidal thoughts, not fun. Glad to have resolved that, but it's dark and terrifying. You feel like a waste of life, but obviously you're not. Yeah, you can't be defined in such a way anyway. It's silly that we attempt to create these artificial guide rails and apply ourselves to that. Most important thing, no matter what, please hear me on this. In the midst of experiencing the intensity of these experiences, because I know they can get strong, do not do anything. Do not move a muscle. Do not get up and go somewhere. Do not run down the hall. This will prevent you from taking a certain type of action that can harm you or someone else. Because I know it gets intense and I know it can feel like a panic sometimes. Sit with it. And if you need to take a break, the only muscle you move is the hand to the remote control and watch some Netflix, whatever that looks like. Do not go anywhere. If the mind wants to start making plans on what to do, don't entertain it. If it feels like it's getting out of control, wall sit. Sit against the wall with your legs at a 90-degree angle and sit in that position until exhaustion, until you cannot sit that way any longer. That will definitely get you out of the mind. That's break glass in case of emergency, but do not do anything. Please listen. Don't. Nothing to do. I promise. Sit with it. it will break itself. It will break itself. If you feel scared, the fear will break itself. If suicidal thoughts are going crazy, they break themselves. They're just being desperate. It doesn't know. But none of it's true. None of it's real. Don't do anything. Still. The more desperate it gets, the more still you become. The more desperate it gets, the more still you become. All right, I'm actually a little bit over. I must go. I'm so grateful to sit with all of you again today. So much love and compassion here. So many great questions. So much engagement. A lot of excitement. Big hugs. I'm giving everyone a hug simultaneously. If you've ever had an actual hug, you know what I'm talking about. These hugs are pretty good. All right. I love everybody. I love you so much. And I will speak to you soon. Thank you. See you next week.